Well, my name is Lane Santa Cruz, and I'm born and raised here in Tucson. I was born on the west side and spent the majority of my time in the south side. But I've been living in Ward 1 for over 12 years now, raising my family. The job description for Ward 1, on paper, you are there to represent the west side and the southwest side of the city. The way that I envision it, moving forward, I would love it to be a position where somebody is in a facilitation role so that a lot of the ideas and the policies and the investment is coming from the community, and that we work with the community to create that kind of leadership and agency where there's a system for bringing those things up to the office and working with them and fleshing them out, whether it's specific neighborhood improvements, like we need a park, or these are the improvements in the park, or if it comes to development, these are our priorities, or this is what we need, like we need grocery stores, so what's the council office going to do to help bring in food to these food deserts that exist in the community, and then using that role to facilitate and help make those things happen. So I am also interested in seeing how that works with policy, so that it's really coming from the needs of the community than just people at City Hall making those decisions, being a little disconnected from the on-the-ground issues. When elected, my top 3 priorities are transportation, making sure that we have a transportation network that works for people and not just motorized vehicles. We have an overwhelming number of tragic deaths on our roads, and it's alarming, and it's kind of disturbing that we don't do more about it. And a lot of it, I know sometimes the easy thing is enforcement, or people did it, only attribute personal responsibility to the issue when we have infrastructure, a network that facilitates that. In Ward 1, we have I-10 and I-19 that kind of breaks us apart from the rest of the city. So anytime people are thinking about a network or infrastructure that prioritizes people walking and people on bikes, we're kind of left out of it. So I want to make sure that those connections are there, especially when we are needing to cross over the freeways because we are using an alternative mode of transportation, that it's safe. And then the next one would be keeping our communities affordable to live in, whether that's through housing, through property taxes, making sure that the things that people need to live are there, whether it's our schools, having quality schools and having community city school partnerships to do that. If people need groceries, like access to healthy food, that's within a reasonable distance, that you don't have to drive 15 minutes to get to the closest grocery store. That's everything that goes into making a community affordable. Lastly, the youth investment piece. Making sure that we're thinking about prevention and education and intervention as a city that's going to be healthy and resilient in the future, and making sure that we are investing in our own talent here at home, instead of letting our young and our brightest, our professionals leave because they don't feel like they have work opportunities here. So those are some of the really important ones. Some of the conversations that are happening at the door are, people want their streets fixed. They want fresh ideas and perspectives and people that feel like part of the community here. So that's where I've received a lot of positive response, that when I tell them I grew up here, I went to Desert View High School, my partner's a teacher at Choya High School, they feel like, oh, you're just part of my neighborhood or part of my community, or my grandkid goes to Choya, or I graduated from Choya. So it's really neat to see people feel connected to what we're doing at the door. Since I've been around, I'm 35 years old, that I've never seen people that look like me in leadership positions making decisions for communities that look like me, like us here in Tucson. So I think one of our biggest challenges right now in general at the city level in the leadership is representation. Like the Tucson that I know, the Tucson that I grew up in, looks very different than the Tucson that's at the table, making decisions. So trying to be a bridge to those two worlds to make sure that when we are talking about that we're building a downtown for everyone and that we want it to be accessible, that sometimes we got to think, do people on the south side really go downtown? Like, do they feel like that's a place for them? And if not, because say like my dad doesn't travel really north of 22nd, that's not where he travels, is like how do we create those like cultural hubs and destinations in our community where people feel like that's a gathering space for them? So thinking like of 12th Avenue and 6th Avenue as those places that people go to, and how do we bring investments there so that it feels like a community center, and that maybe other wards have those kinds of destinations, that we can look at it differently instead of just this part of town is the only central location. One of the other challenges, is making sure that the decisions that are being made are coming from the community, from the people's lived experiences. I think that's really important. I know that I have felt that there's been that disconnect, and I want to make sure that policies are coming from the needs of the community, because like when we're talking about having a shortage of affordable housing, that's so important that we have that in mind at the city level, but then also knowing that like all the programs in the world aren't gonna address the issues of poverty and why people can't pay their mortgage, or if they're burdened with their rent or their mortgage, that we need to make sure that we're bringing wages and that we have jobs, that we're bringing wages up and have jobs that pay living wages, so that people have access to those educational opportunities or to the trainings or to recreate, all the things that elevate our quality of life. Well, I've seen up to this point that I was the first in my family to go to college. I was the first in my family to get a PhD. I've been that person to do a lot of firsts in my family. So I see myself as a bridge, as a connection to those two worlds, and bringing them together. So as an organizer, as well as somebody who has the experience of like facilitating difficult conversations and getting people to come to a consensus on decisions of what they want to see, is something that I bring to the table. Successes and failures, I think, is the reason why I am interested in running for office, because before this, I never knew the kind of impact that your elected officials have in your everyday life. So I remember the first time I worked at the council office when I was like 23 years old, getting calls from moms concerned about trying to get their kids to cross by Mission Manor Park, and how dangerous it was for them to cross, and why wouldn't there be a hawk light there. And like this was around the time that like budgets were bad and there wasn't funding. But then there being an opportunity with the RTA, like just being at that table and having those conversations about like maybe there might be some funding that we could allocate towards hawks, and then just like pushing that through and being like, this is a part of town that lacks this kind of infrastructure, and it's gonna alleviate some of these safety concerns for young kids going to the school there and also going to the park. And we want to encourage, people walking, and we want to make sure that they feel safe doing that. So I remember that being a win that felt like, oh my goodness, this is why we're doing this. And then on the other side, having like something that felt like a failure. I remember specifically along Mission Road. Mission Road is really dark at night. There's been a lot of people that have gotten hit at night because they can't see. And I remember getting a call as well about somebody who was hit and got killed, and they were using the bus and they were trying to walk home. And this was a señora. She was like 54 years old, and they were like, can we light it up, can we make it so they're more visible? And then like that response that like, oh, we have this like dark skies stipulation, and that's like an area that's protected, and we can't, like we can't do that. So those are the moments where you feel like there has to be a way, there has to be a third way where, yes, we're protecting, our night skies, but also that we're like prioritizing safety and these. And so those are the things I want to come in and challenge and push, because they have an impact on people. I support the Tucson Families Free and Together initiative, and early on I signed the petition to get it on the ballot. I think that every Tucson voter should have an opportunity to weigh in on that. And I also think it's important that we continue pushing for policies that are going to protect our most vulnerable here in Tucson. Like police accountability is one part of it, but the other one is that, like, yes, we have ICE and the sheriffs who have, can cross any jurisdiction, here in the city, so that we're not safe. Our people who are undocumented are not safe. While that is still happening in our neighborhoods. So I'm also interested in making sure that we're pushing for policies like a municipal ID, making sure that we continue to have affordable public transportation, because a lot of these folks do ride the bus or ride their bikes for fear of getting pulled over. They've looked into other modes to travel. Okay, so what keeps me up at night, and this is going to be more like just specific to the work, that we do here in the community. There's still a lot of toxic like relationships and interactions here in the community that go far back. And even as somebody trying to run for office, and like I'm a younger generation, but I also see like the value in like respecting and honoring where people were the generation before us and the work that they were doing, feeling like, okay, moving forward, things can look different. But people wanting everything to be just black or white, you're good or you're bad, and not that we're all complex people. And have different life experiences that like colors and filters the way that we approach issues in our community. So that's something that maybe that keeps me up at night, because I'm really passionate about wanting to work with people like, people like the people in my community are my people, and I want to do right, by them. And sometimes our fight is bigger than the infighting that happens, and hoping that we can come together with that. But what gives me hope is a couple of years back, we started organizing community bike rides in the South Side, and just to see the families and the people that come together, people that haven't ridden a bike in like 60 years, jump on a Tugo bike and ride around South 12th Avenue or through Drexel, and just like we're listening to cumbias or banda while we're doing it, is just, like this is what it's about. And knowing that we can come to the council office and bring that kind of joy and that kind of wonder is what I'm looking forward to. For example, Barrio Anita has seen, you see it in Menlo Park, but Barrio Anita more recently has had lots get sold that have been sitting empty there for a long time, and seeing like these duplex style 2-story homes go up, and they felt like, where did this come from? How come there was no notification? And as we started digging through that, it was like, well, these lots are zoned R3, and they allow for that kind of density, so they don't have to, like, developers don't have to talk to anybody about what they're doing. Like, yeah, they just go get their permits through the city, and all is good. The issue is that, like, these homes are being sold for like $375,000, next to homes that are like falling apart that haven't had investment in a long time, because the señora is like 85 years old, and she, the lot's been in the family for over 150 years. So that, there's a tension there about like feeling powerless. Like, what do we do when we can't even communicate with the investor who came in to do that, and they're not interested in hearing what the community has to say, and then they're marketing everything as like, come live close to downtown and this like historic barrio. They are profiting off of like the culture and the history there, but bringing in an element that doesn't match. But then there's opportunity there too. There's city-owned land in Anita, and making sure that city-owned land works with the Pima County Land Trust and other development that brings affordable housing into that community, because there's a lot of folks who have moved out who would want to move back in, but there isn't that access of affordability built in. So that's just like a experience happening right now within Ward 1. And yes, I think the city is a partner in addressing the issues of gentrification. It's not going to be the only one, but we are definitely a player, and we need to make sure that we're doing right. That one right now, it's happening, so what can we do in the moment? And I think that's working with the county to at least freeze property taxes for families who've lived there for a long time, making sure that they're not feeling that push out, because they can't afford the taxes, and they have owned that home for a long time. So those are like some immediate things, but in the future, like, yes, bringing affordability in, and then also just working with the state and making sure that our state representation is looking out for working families and not investors and developers. The Rio Nuevo, I feel like I'm gonna have to have like a reset, once in office, to figure out how we move forward. We know that the original intent of the Rio Nuevo, bringing a lot of this like rich cultural history and creating that as a landmark, those elements have completely gone out, that project. And once the state took it over, from saying that there was a lack of things moving forward, deprioritize like the cultural historical elements and prioritize making sure that anything that went in was like generating money. So that looks very different than its original intent. And I feel like, okay, there's the last 8 years, I feel like that kind of development has happened, and it is what it is. But how do we make sure now that we still fight for these other elements that are like an anchor for the city and reminds the city where it comes from, and what it grew out of? And I think those are important, especially like the elements that like recognize our Tohono O'odham, relatives here, the other open spaces that were intended to be in Rio Nuevo. Definitely a big no on I-11. We don't need more freeways. It is crazy to think that in this day and age we'd be thinking about putting an interstate going through our national Saguaro monument, a sacred area for our Tohono O'odham relatives. Like, absolutely no. Freeways are so much of what's disconnected us from people in the community, and just made it all about goods and how fast can we move it. So I don't support it.